Welcome to another episode of the CS Breakdown. The CS Breakdown is a monthly conversation about the coverage of Latino and other advocacy-oriented issues in the English language press. This month's discussion is centered around the issues affecting the LGBTQ plus community and people of color. Our goal here at Communication Shop and Funda Medios is to foster an ongoing dialogue between media professionals and the communities they cover to elevate the issues that affect us all. Today, we have with us Alberto Mendoza. Alberto is the managing editor for the John S. Knight Journalism Fellowship at Stanford University. Born in Mexico and raised in Puerto Rico and California, Alberto has extensive experience in nonprofit management, mentorship, and entrepreneurship. Before his current role, Alberto was the executive director for the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. Alberto also founded honor41.org, an online national nonprofit that celebrates Latinx LGBTQ plus stories, individuals, and community. Alberto will lead the discussion today. Alberto, take it away.
Hello there. Thank you so much, Fernanda. I'm really excited to be here. The panelists are, of course, amazing. And diving into a conversation about what is happening with the lack of visibility and storytelling of our community is something that I am very passionate about and excited to really work with our panelists. So let's get them on. Let's see.
Let's get it on.
All right. Okay. Let's see. First, let's start with Eva Rain. Eva, are you there? All right. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce all of the panelists briefly, and then everybody's going to actually talk a little bit more about their work, specifically because everybody plays a different role in everything that they're doing, and we want to make sure that we don't limit all their experience. So we have Eva Rain. Eva is a Brooklyn writer, trans actor, artist, and also an actress. So excited to hear about Eva's experience, really kind of at a time where they're merging storytelling, journalism, and media in many, many ways that really we haven't seen. So we also have Mayra Hidalgo Salazar. Mayra is the Deputy Executive Director at the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. And we have Xochil Sandoval Underwood, who is a 6-time Emmy Award-winning journalist with over 20 years experience and actually with us from the newsroom right now. So if we get interruptions, we know that that's expected. So thank you all for joining us and making time on this very, very busy day. We are literally at war across all of our states, especially when it comes to LGBTQ rights and what's happening, especially just in Texas, Florida. So I want to kind of start with a little bit of how you're feeling as far as why our stories matter, especially in times like this. And Eva, let's go ahead and start with you if you can, and tell me what does that do to why our stories matter to you?
Right now, our stories matter a great deal. Across this country, there are around 280 anti-trans bills that are targeting trans youth, and that also is a detriment to trans folks in our adulthood. And you know, the United States is setting a precedent for the rest of the world. There's this stat about how a lot of trans women of color won't reach the age of 35 before they are murdered. That stat actually comes from a early study out of Brazil. A great deal of the violence against trans, a great deal of the violence against trans women of color actually happens in Latinx countries, and it has a major impact on trans women of African descent as well as those of indigenous descent. So really, the one way that we can combat the violence, anti-trans bills, is through media, is through the telling of our own stories, through our own mouths, and those who call themselves allies.
Yeah, thank you for that. I was actually good friends with Monica Roberts, who was a Black trans journalist, one of the few, and one of the ones that was always calling everybody out when they needed to be, which I loved about her spirit. And I think there's a big void there, frankly, that is missing, because I feel like if trans journalists are part of the storytelling, then again, they have ownership of what is being said and what is out there. Because normally they're just covered when they've been victims of crime, or something sensationalized, or for propaganda, especially around election time. So Mayra, I know Creating Change is coming up, and it's a big conference that you guys put on every year. I've been to it several times. The energy is incredible. You see so many young people of color that are ready to take on the world. Tell us how politics and the current issues that are really bubbling up in all these states right now, that we know was coming. We knew this was going to come. Now that it's here, why is storytelling so important?
Well, something we are very clear about at the task force is you have to see it to be it, right? These anti-trans bills, these anti-LGBTQ bills that are popping up all over at the local state level are happening by design. It's not a coincidence. This is happening in the context of LGBTQ youth coming out at younger and younger ages. And we're really clear that these are direct attacks on these youth, right? Who are really stepping into embracing themselves and who they are. Something I love about Creating Change, in addition to like the amazing community building we do, is we really focus on training up our next generation of LGBTQ leaders, making sure we have workshops that really give us the tools not to just organize, but also heal from the anti-LGBTQ sentiment that we're having to move through.
Thank you so much. And we're going to keep talking about that. But I also want to hear from Xochil, because I think, Xochil, you've been in the newsroom for such a long time, and I'm curious to hear really how the pendulum potentially has swung in media, especially news telling, about whether these stories are covered, how these stories are covered, and just what are challenges you might have internally to make sure that these stories make it to the public.
I think there's two ways that I see it. We have the stories that we see all the time, and how do we present that story differently so that it doesn't seem like it's the same story that we're seeing continuously. I think it starts in an editorial room. In the morning, we're talking about pitching stories. And it's tapping into the community, the LGBTQ community, and finding those resources there that, this community is part of an entire community as a whole. They have some of the same issues and problems that every human being in this part of the community has. So we have to use them as resources and tap into these communities so they reflect the issues that everyone else is going through and experiencing, and that we use them as sources instead of going to the typical people that we go to. So, we are always looking for someone who can talk on camera. We're always looking for someone who's available to tell us their story. But I don't think we tap enough into the LGBTQ community to reflect even some of the issues that everyone else is going through. As far as telling the deeper story, the stories that are not being told, I think that it all comes down to the editorial pitch. I mean, I'm here in the morning, and when we hear these stories, they're pitching them like they sound pretty much the same. So I think it takes a lot of creativity, and it takes a lot of moving beyond beyond the pitch to really get those stories on air. There's a lot going on every day in news. It's how do we pick the story that's going to get to make it? And I think that we have to go beyond the story we've already seen. And there's so many of them. There's more to it than what we've seen. And I think we just are not pitching these stories in our newsrooms.
Yeah, and I've worked with a lot of journalists over the years, and I know that a lot of times they start with a really great idea. And by the time that it's pitched, the idea is stripped of its integrity, frankly, and it becomes a story that's sensationalized and frankly often does not put us in the best of lights. I'm curious from all three of you, now that we have everybody, what do you think who's doing it right, and who is getting our stories out there right? And it doesn't have to be LGBTQ, but just, as a Latino, as an African American, as a trans person, who's doing it right, and how do we use them as a reference so that we can point to an example of, hey, they're doing it, so why not us? Thoughts?
I can tap in. I mean, I watch news all day. I think there's a lot of news stories that are done right. I think what we're talking about is we need to see more of them. I've seen a reporter talk about an education issue and highlight that issue that everyone is feeling, and has a gay couple there with their child going through that process. I think we need to look at these stories from a human perspective, not just an activist perspective. It's there. We're all humans. We're all living in the same world, and I think that these stories are being told, and I've seen them almost in every network, are being told right. We just are not seeing enough of them.
One of the things that I've noticed, though, Mayra, did you want to add something?
I did. Something that just occurred to me, the name of the Instagram page was leaving my mind, but I think there's a lot of these stories on like Instagram and TikTok that are being self-directed by directly impacted people, right? By LGBTQ people themselves. We are moving into curating our own content, and we have been. Los Varones on Instagram, I fangirl their page all the time because their stories are not just about struggle, but they're about the history of resistance, the real victories, and like cultural history of our movement and of our community, that I think is an important part of adding nuance to our stories. Not all the stories need to be sensationalized tragedies, right? There's also stories of celebration, victory. Queer people, we're building our own healthcare systems. We are raising families. We're building our own communities, and those stories are not visible enough in the face of so much tragic stories that are uplifted more.
Mayra, to your point, when we talk about where we're finding these stories and how we tap into them, social media is an absolute great platform to look for these stories. There are some incredible things being seen here. Everything from a TikTok that made you laugh, or a TikTok that made you feel something, to the continuous content that's being uploaded by the Instagram page that you mentioned of Los Varones. I've seen so many. So I highly think that our direction is not just tapping into our communities, but how we tap into those communities. We tap into those communities nowadays via social media, and it is an incredibly great tool to connect and to find people who are willing to talk to us on air, on camera, about some of the issues that we're seeing.
Yeah, and it's Gran Varones, which is
Gran
a
Varones.
great
Gran
Varones.
Louis Fonseca is outstanding and has been at it for a long time. So shout out to his work. Now, I also have some very good, close personal friends who are in the trans community. And one of the things that they're always adamant about is that when we talk about the trans community, that we focus on their resilience, not their victimization. And to hear about the beauty of what it is to be trans. Eva, tell us a little bit about how you address that, and how, as an advocate and actress and author, you're really, as an artist, really pushing that.
Yeah, one of the things that I always think about is, okay, like I'm thinking of a pitch, I'm thinking of some kind of story to tell. Let me just think about what me and my friends talk about, like I just literally take what we talk about, obviously with their consent, and I'm like, okay, let's try to, really make the change that we want to see. So I really just try to humanize us as best as I possibly can, by just telling our everyday stories, by talking about how we make music, we make art, we're writers, we're you know, we are in sports. I mean, really, you know, trans folks really are in every aspect of the culture of every industry, and that's not something you're seeing a lot of. Oftentimes when you see trans folks being talked about in the media, it's always something having to do with bathrooms, something having to do with murder, something having to do with workplace issues, you know, and it's never really a topic on how we're thriving. So that is always one of my main focal points. Even in my work with Vice, where I spoke about the death of Kelly Stowe, I still was so happy to work with a team that was shedding light on all of the really all of the beautiful things that these multitude of Black and brown trans folks are doing in Detroit and really just around the world.
Yeah, and I think it also speaks to kind of that intersectionality
Yes.
that really makes a lot of us. We're not just siloed and we're not one. But before we jump into that, Eva, I want to hear if, in your opinion, the Black community is embracing the trans community enough. It's Black History Month. I know that for Latinos, I know that my Latina trans sisters are not always completely embraced and welcome, and that's a fight we always have to keep at. But what's been your experience? Because I want to see these voices celebrated during this month as well and not omitted. And I'm curious to what you could share with us about that.
You know, I definitely think that the tide is turning. You know, I mean, we have seen a lot of change over recent years. I mean, I am a very young person, so I can't speak to what people were going through in the 90s and earlier. But just speaking off of what I do know and what I have seen, things are definitely changing. Even in my own family, when I go back to Missouri, a lot of my family, like, they're happy to see me, you know, and they're just happy that I'm happy. And that is something that I think everyone needs to take as a example on how to embrace trans folks. And also, you know, it shouldn't take someone in your family being trans for you to suddenly be like, oh yeah, like, that's a person too. Really, you should just see someone's personhood and just value them off of the cuff, you know? Like, it shouldn't have to be this whole like process of trying to empathize with someone who might just be a little bit different than you, when really trans folks have always been there, you know? Like, this is nothing new. Um, so yeah, I think things are getting better, but there's definitely a long, long way to go. I'm not seeing enough trans folks in I guess a lot of traditional Black spaces. Oftentimes we have to fight to have our voice there if we feel that it's worth the fight at all. And, you know, that's also something that does make me very sad. Thinking about walking into like the Black church, or thinking about my friends who are thinking about going home, or, you know, the moments that I have any apprehension about going home. You know, like, that shouldn't be a thing, but it's slowly getting better.
And let me be clear, thank you for that, but let me be clear that gays have also been bad on against, especially I would say as a gay man, Latino man, I can't always say that the mainstream LGBT community included me, and that we have not always been kind to our trans sisters as well. So I think we all have a responsibility in that. Now, for me, the show Pose has been very, very exciting to watch because we are seeing front and center Latinx, Black, trans actors talking about a story that they lived. And while it's fictional, it's also very much centered on the true experience that seems to get whitewashed whenever the story is told. Mayra, tell us a little bit about how that's changed in some of your work. And then I want to hear from Xochil about how does that play out, and how you seek out voices that you can tap into during interviews or during times when you really need that representation? Mayra?
Sure. I mean, the power of cultural content that really embraces the wholeness of our experiences. I mean, there can always be critiques, and Pose is such an incredible example of that. My mummy, who I call Mayra, the original OG, because I'm named after her, we would sit down and watch this show together, right? And for someone who was, my mommy was raised in a very conservative part of Costa Rica. For her to be sitting down and watching this TV show with me and falling in love with these characters, right? That power of driving that kind of cultural content is so political, because it's the power to be able to change people's hearts and minds, and really deepen our understanding of each other. So I'm so glad you brought up Pose as an example, because I immediately thought of her and how that show really broadened her understanding, not just of LGBT people of color, but of trans people of color.
Yeah, I love that show myself. Xochil, what do you have to add to that?
I mean, there is no other way to mirror what happens in our society and be able to influence change by telling, by the arts. I really believe that they go hand in hand. The arts allow us to see things from a different perspective and allow us to tell this story and have it be seen in different ways. From where, I work in the media, most definitely, and we want to highlight that. We want to find these stories. As I had mentioned earlier, it's one of I think the biggest challenges that there is tapping into the community in the right way, not just when we need to highlight it, or when, as you mentioned, it's a political season or so on. There's so much that goes on an everyday basis. Shows like Pose and so on, they highlight just how that the communities are being confronted with some of the issues that they face. You're able to see these stories straight on and empathize and understand. But more than anything, make it a norm. It shouldn't be this taboo in this day and age to see some of this stuff. But people still definitely have opinions and definitely are not. I would say that we're as open-minded as probably you're going to get, but you're going to get people, and we see that in media, that the comments they leave, the calls we get. It's kind of combating that, and I believe that art is a strong force of doing that. It really normalizes and makes us all see each other for who we are, which is human beings, and we all struggle, and we all see things, and we all face some of the same challenges, regardless of how we think or what we look like. And I think art is just shows like this really highlight some of the, in the best way possible and the most creative way possible, with great stories, highlight some of these challenges that our communities are facing.
Yeah, and while no show is perfect, we would rather have something that's out there, and more than one, ideally, that really allows the characters to be richer, developed, to continue to be authentic to our experience, not just the way that we're pigeonholed and how they want us to talk about the story.
Well, Ava mentioned, she said, I'm really young. I cannot speak for those that, came before me and how things have been or what we've seen. And, but we know that challenge has been ongoing. I mean, what we're seeing today on TV and movies and art and so on was not as visible many years ago. So, I think that every little moment and win matters.
Yeah, it does. And I know that we have a question for Xochil. Fernanda, do you want to ask that, or do you? I think it came up.
Am I seeing? I think I see it on the chat.
Okay.
Let me see. I see part of it. I don't see all of it.
Okay, I'll come back to that. While we do that, Eva, I want to hear, especially as an actress, how is Hollywood opening up, and do you see that there are greater ways of exploring what characterization of trans people is happening, or is it still the same kind of script that you get?
I definitely was having a period where I was seeing like the same sort of scripts. They were always, like it was always like there was like this trans girl just like walking down the street and suddenly she gets attacked like out of nowhere. And I was like, where did that come from? I was like, hold up. But then it was literally this time last year, I got a casting call for this film that is about a young Black trans teen finishing out her last year of high school. And she meets this boy and she just falls in love. And it was really, it was really the first time that I saw a script that actually humanized the trans woman and also it also was a starring role. So I was like, okay, I kind of want that. And luckily I was able to film that this past summer. So yeah, thank you. So yeah, the title is Anything's Possible. And Billy Porter from Pose is the director. And yeah, I'm still kind of wrapping my mind around the whole thing. It was so amazing, and it really changed my idea of what is possible in Hollywood and really just the world. Um and it also was a very healing moment too, because I was like, oh wow, like, if I can star in this movie, then there really is no limit. Um yeah,
Love
so
that, right? It's anything is possible, and you're talking about that possibility. Okay, so we have that question for Xochil, and then I want to hear also kind of about why we only are featured during Gay Pride Month, and what are the other things that we can be featured in at different times of the year. So, how about you? We start with you, Xochil.
Can you hear me? Oh, yeah, I thought I might be muted still. Um, this is a great question. I mean, we're talking, is there a real concern when it comes to choosing stories that showcase minorities? And the key word here is do we mean by real concern? We want to make sure, I think, and I work in a pretty diverse newsroom, and I come from news where I was targeting Latinos. I worked for Spanish news for a long time, where my community was extremely targeted in terms of getting the message that was impacting them in their community in Spanish, just so that they can understand and know what was going on in their communities. Working in a diverse newsroom that targets the entire community. It does pose its challenges. I will not deny that. It definitely does. It really comes down again to that pitch. Why is it concerned this community? How much of this community is impacted when we're talking about a story? I can pitch immigration stories, all kinds of angles. To the end of the day, I'm realistically aware that that is not what our newscast is going to be full of. It's not going to have all the immigration stories, but what we want to make sure is that our community's concerns are represented in this newscast, that we're getting all of our community, including the Hispanic community, the Latino community, the LGBTQ community, that these concerns that everyone might have are reflected in the stories that we cover. So it's not perfect. Yeah, it's not. It is a challenge to definitely, to explain why is this important, why is this issue important for this sector of our community who makes up our audience, and explaining that and really getting to the root of why this story is important for us to do. So those conversations are had in editorial meetings. Those conversations are had, and sometimes we have to do a background, set it up. Why do I care? Why would anyone care about this? And give a little bit more information. And I think that I think we can all be better at understanding all the diverse communities that we live in, LGBTQ, communities of color. We all need to know more about each other so that we're able to, get those stories in and care about them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. How do we avoid getting exploited, Mayra, during LGBTQ Pride Month? Because I know you're at this work daily, right? And you probably hear many more requests for interviews around June. So what are the other stories that are out there that can be told about our community throughout the year?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no progressive issue in this country that does not touch the LGBTQ community. So let's start there. From housing to healthcare, to immigration reform, to Build Back Better. Where were LGBTQ voices in those fights? We were present. We were organizing. I can tell you, at least from the immigrant rights perspective, the pioneers of that movement were queer and trans women. Right. So I think there is a fundamental disconnect around thinking about the intersectional experience, right, of queer people. We touched on this a little bit earlier. I think it's important to name that intersectionality. This was a concept coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, a Black feminist. And to break this down, this is about taking into account that someone's gender, class, race, and other oppressed identities impact how they move through the world. I don't wake up a woman one day and decide to be an immigrant the next, and decide the next day I'm going to be a queer person. I'm all of those things all the time, right? So how can we, as folks who are in leadership and also folks who are driving media content, be thinking holistically about people's experiences and how LGBTQ people are being touched by all of these progressive issues?
Yeah, and the bottom line is that also, well, not bottom line, but who is in charge also matters, right?
Yes.
Who at the top is going to greenlight that story or greenlight that script. Last year, David Artavia was managing editor of Out magazine. And something that I had never seen in Out was this story about what was happening to the LGBT community in Venezuela. And talking about, the lack of medications for people living with AIDS, the impact on trans people. I mean, it was so in depth and so beautiful, in a very sad way. But I was just so proud to see that kind of story a part of Out magazine. And again, I think it took a Latino to be a part of gay Latino to be a part of greenlighting something that really doesn't normally make the forefront. And while we have allies that are in leadership, how do we get more of us in those positions of power? I know Eva mentioned Billy Porter, and I think that the attention and the work that he's done through Post, he's been working for a long time. It seems like now he's finally able to kind of greenlight his own projects. Xochil, what about with news? How can we get our allyship to also look at us as those who need to be in those positions of power and greenlighting projects? And I want actually all of us to talk and weigh in a little bit on that. So we'll start with Xochil, then Eva, and then Mayra.
Well, I can tell you that, and we are seeing, I think, from what I see, a shift in where media is going. It's changed a little bit. I think I'll start with, we want more interest in management. I mean, there is a need for that. There is a need, I can tell you, in this newsroom and newsrooms across the country for producers who become executive producers, who make an impact in the influence what content we put on our shows, who end up becoming take up upper management positions, such as assistant news directors or news directors and so on and so forth. We need more of that. There is we have a shortage where we can't find people interested enough to go into these careers. So I think that, from my perspective, it's how I see it. I'm ready to nurture and cultivate and get going. I just need you to come and knock on my door.
Wonderful. I will tell you, though, that when working with journalists young journalists who wanted to go into the industry because they wanted to tell stories about their communities in a way that we're not being told. When they got to the newsroom, they weren't able to tell those stories. And I think the definition of community was different from the other side of the news versus the actual journalist. And so you get disillusioned and you leave the industry. So that is definitely a challenge. Eva, what about with your work? We talked about Billy Porter kind of opening doors. If you had a magic wand and you can greenlight projects, what would those look like?
Wow. Okay. That's a really big question. Honestly, I can think of numerous people here in Brooklyn, in like Cali, in Missouri, Chicago, Miami. I can think of a lot of people who definitely have a lot of stories that they want to tell. They just don't always have the resources to do it. I think one thing that often happens is, yeah, people try to present their stories, and after getting a couple of no's, they tend to give up because hey, like it's like hard to be so vulnerable and then to have the door slammed in your face. So I would really want to. I think really social media is probably the best way to find new, fresh voices, because you will find people in other cities that you never thought of before, who are ready to do it. I was in the middle of Missouri, and then suddenly I got this job at them here in New York, and that was a huge change for me. Really just thinking about what was feasible versus what's now possible, it was just the biggest shift. So I really would want everyone else to also have those moments where they can really get out, like get outside of their own neighborhood and really tell their story to an audience that's ready to hear it, because the audience is there. It's just hard to always have those two ends meet.
Great, thank you. And Mayra, you see this really across the country. The task force work has always been so important to our community. Creating change is a very important community for young queer voices of color. Actually, just all voices of color, I think, that come together. What are you seeing as far as areas that have really come a long way for storytelling, and what are some areas that still need more of our voices?
So I think there's definitely a lot of opportunities in Spanish language media around how we cover LGBTQ issues and stories. There is so much we can be doing to be leveraging, canales like Univision and Telemundo could be doing so much to deepen the education across generations. Right? I am a believer that we need organizers everywhere. We need organizers in the newsroom. We need organizers that are producing our cultural content. We need organizers that are like on the front lines and canvassing and knocking doors. And a part of doing that organizing is taking into account that putting people through a political process and journey is paramount, right? To realizing the change we want. I could sit here and talk about LGBTQ issues all day, but if I can't communicate those ideas with my tias and tios, right, then there's a lot of work I need to be doing as an organizer. So that's just something I would offer up. A lot of folks think about organizing as something where you have to like show up in the streets and, hold the signs and disrupt. And that's a part of it. And there's another part of it that is also about like throwing the rope behind you. All of us here are here as a result of people that have invested in us, invested time, invested professional development, invested like pep talks. And I think we're each here committed to doing the same for generations that come after us.
Great. I think that next generation is so important. I always say, my goal is to be a gate opener. Whatever I can do, I get there to open doors so that more people can follow me. And as we mentioned, my work with Honor 41 really came because It Gets Better campaign years back just didn't have voices of color and didn't have a lot of Latinos and didn't have them in Spanish. And while that's changed and that's grown, back then I was like, well, when does it get better? Because I remember it took a while. So seeing a video from a celebrity just wasn't going to make it easier for me. And I started Honor 41 with that premise that we're just not included. And so how do we reclaim the narrative that our families are talking about us behind our backs because of the shame that we don't talk and are open about being gay? I can tell you who's talking about me being gay. And that changes the perception. So if I don't talk about myself in a way that is confident and very present, then others will. And we need to make sure that we just don't wait for our stories to be told and take ownership of that. Now, I think, again, we're back to politics and election cycles and times where we are used as fear tactics, and we are also victimized just by the way that they talk about, even especially youth right now in Texas, what's happening in Florida in schoolrooms. How do you cover that, Xochil, as a newsroom? And then I want to hear from Eva and Mayra also. How do you talk about that as an advocacy point? Because I think media doesn't always just go to advocacy. They almost kind of shy away from the advocates because they know they're going to push for that, and they want to keep things fair. But come on, it's affecting lives. So how do we balance that out, Xochil?
It's always a challenge. Balance is our number one, it's how our ethical duty as journalists to do, to provide those two perspectives and to provide a balanced view so that our audience can make decisions and choices and take positions on certain things. So yeah, I do think that there's challenges there in getting all of the communities that need representation to speak and to voice their opinions on things. And I'm the first to say that we struggle to get, sometimes we struggle to get a Republican perspective during elections because they don't speak many times. They don't want to put out a statement, or they don't want to have a reaction. And we see it on the other end too. Sometimes people don't want to have don't want to go on camera to talk about things. So I think that's one of the challenges that we face during political season, is making sure that we provide a most balanced coverage that we possibly can. And we do run into challenges in trying to get both sides when we're covering certain issues.
Oh, that's a tough one, because I feel like there is no one side when the other side is about erasing my existence, killing me, or completely just not treating me as a human being. So I understand the value of.
I think in journalism we have to. That's the whole premise, right? That we provide both points of views. We know our audience may not like all of them. We know that, and unfortunately, they're not going to. However, continued coverage and continued work in trying to really highlight these issues, and reflected with communities actually voicing out their concerns and talking about the things that they're living and seeing and putting them on the air. We do our best to go the other side and say, hey, would you like to comment on this? If they don't, they don't. But the story is still there, and we do cover these stories. I understand, Alberto, that, I come from this is my job, right? To have as much as a neutrality, regardless of where I stand, and make sure that we're getting these voices on the air. But we do face those challenges when we're trying to cover something like a political campaign, where we're going to have one on one side and one on the other, and how do we get both sides to dialogue? And sometimes that's really a challenge, I will say, especially during political season, especially in the last couple of elections.
Yeah, well, I think that is definitely a challenge when media does not always feel like it's has our best interest. But I understand that effort to make really provide a balanced story. And I now get to work at Stanford.edu, which is a journalism fellowship that looks at what are the systemic ways we can tackle problems in journalism. We do an annual fellowship. We bring 20 of the brightest minds across the world and look at how to tackle some of these projects. So we're happy to share that link. It's an annual process. But I'm curious in shifting a little bit, because with a lot of visibility also can come a lot of backlash. And we can, we can be attacked by cowards who use a fake name or a fake profile to say the most heinous and horrendous things to us, including life threats. How Mayra and Eva, how do you balance that out? Because again, putting yourselves out there means that you're also putting yourself out there to the world in a way that isn't always kind.
Of course. I mean, and my mommy is always like the #1 worrier around this because of how out there I am. And this is, yes, there's always risks about us being so visible, about people being able to like Google my name and like get all of this information about me. And at the end of the day, I'm clear that every time I share my story, I'm part of a movement of people, and I'm building a movement of people behind me, in addition to maybe triggering people who are opposed to who I am. Now, around the faith point, this is a really common argument, right? It's an age-old argument around that is used as a weapon against LGBTQ people. The task force, we have a faith institute that's part of our Creating Change conference and is part of our organization, where we actually have LGBTQ people who are people of faith. Right. So that's the other side to the story that we need to make sure is balanced whenever we're uplifting anti-LGBTQ people who claim to be religious. There's also queer people who are religious, who are even clergy people. And I think that's an important nuance we need to add.
Very good. Thank you. Eva, how do you handle some of that online hate? And as we're wrapping down, we're also going to go back to another question with newsrooms that's come in about how Telemundo and Univision could play a bigger role in some of this. So, but Eva, we'll start with you. How do you handle kind of the haters, basically?
The block button is my best friend, I honestly just don't really have time for it. Because also, I mean, if you feel that the only way that you can speak to me is through some fake account, I honestly don't need to spend any time worrying about you, because you probably have a lot of things that you're trying to work out, and that's just not really my issue. And if there is anyone who says anything to me on the street, I definitely will weigh my options on whether or not it's safe to respond. If I am with my friends, oftentimes they'll jump in before I say anything, So really just making sure that I have really good people behind me, and making sure that I have my own precautions set in place. Because I mean, when I was first starting to become more like visible through work I was doing with GLAAD and through like writing that I was doing, I definitely did get some trolls. But luckily there were some older trans women who saw that, reached out and said, okay, girl, this is how you handle that. And let's just, let's just have a good talk about this so that you know how to keep moving forward. So I mean, people are always going to say something. But honestly, anything anyone has to say about me now, it's nothing I haven't heard prior. So, I just brush it off. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for that. And a shout out to Monica Trasandes, who's worked with GLAAD for many years and has been working with newsrooms, especially Telemundo, Univision, and those in Spanish language markets, to ensure that they are educated and the staff is aware of really how to pitch, how to actually feature our community. So I'm curious, Xochil, just even an extension on the question on how do you handle haters, because you're in a setting where it's about the news, and I'm curious how you handle the haters when there are topics that are sensitive. And also, I'm curious if you have some thoughts on everybody. I want to hear your thoughts on what some of these newsrooms can potentially still do even more. Xochil, we'll start with you.
Well, there's haters. We live in a society that kind of hides behind their screen, and that's easy to do. It's easier to throw punches without showing your face, and we definitely see that. We have over close to almost 550,000 Facebook followers just on our station alone here. There is no more commenting that is made in a negative way than a political uh, post that we say, okay, the story's out there, we're putting it out there, and the anger and the hate that comes out there for us posting something that people do not agree with is definitely there, and we see it. We have a responsibility to ensure that the people engaging with our station do not overstep boundaries where they are violent, where they are at a absolutely disrespectful or
Can you block them just like Eva said, or erase?
we do. I mean, we also have the responsibility of freedom of speech, right? We do have a platform that is supposed to engage and allow people to speak their mind. But we need to be able to nurture and cultivate a platform where we can have conversations without this hate tone. So we do look at that, and we do, block and delete people who are absolutely out of line. I mean, threatening someone's life, just abusive language is just not tolerated. There is zero tolerance for that. Yes, you have a right to your opinion, and we grant you a platform to engage, but you must do so respectfully, and you must do so without the intent of hurting someone. And words are hurtful. Words can be very hurtful. So there's just a weapon that people use today to really not just get under our skins, but really it's very hateful, and it incites more hate, and it just nurtures it. So we are conscious of that, and we are definitely looking at that. As far as what we can do more in our newsrooms, I've been in a Spanish newsroom. I worked in Spanish media for over almost 20 years. So I understand the challenges that you speak of and that have been commented is how we can do more. I think Mayra said it very well. It's important for us to educate. It's important for us to set a foundation for coming generations. And much of the Spanish media is about educating not just in the political process, educating not just in the educational system. It's educating in every way, where you don't see that so much in English media as to the basics of how to do something. I think it's important in Spanish to do that and have those open dialogues, town halls that you can, have people participate, of forums where people can go, continue to, promote ways where the community can engage and learn about all of our communities, including the LGBTQ community. I can tell you that I have, a mother who, just like Mayra's mom, is learning in the process. And there's so many questions, but they're eager to learn. They come from a completely different generation, but they want to learn and they want to know. They just need to hear it in their language so that they understand it better.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I have one of those as well. And I'm a mama's boy, and sometimes the stuff that I'm posting, my mom goes, "Ay, que va a decir la familia," and I'm like, well, they have to know what is happening, and this is how it affects us. And again, I want that to come out of my mouth, because if they don't see us, then we are invisible. And so if we don't speak up, then they don't get to hear how some of these things really affect us. And from my experience working with NHJ, the networks and leaders at Telemundo and Univision, we're very focused on inclusion and telling our stories. But at the same time, when other news happens, those are the things that kind of get kicked to the side and then only bring it back during Gay Pride. So I would like to see us be able to push on that a little bit more. I would love to see 2 national crews cover creating change for the entire week so that they could see what is happening and how these leaders are being empowered, how they're training, how they're learning from one another, and how they're inspired. I mean, to me, like, that's a great story that shouldn't just be done by the local station of the local city that is covered. So we're wrapping down, and I'm curious to get some last words from each of you about just if you can highlight maybe 3 things that you want people to know, or that you can give people 3 action items of something that they can personally do to either tell more stories, can push media to tell more stories, and or even, potentially serve themselves up as resources for media. We'll start with Mayra, and then Eva, and then we'll close with our news person. Xochil.
So I'll just start with doing more research on the impact of the LGBTQ vote. I think is a really important step to cover our political issues. We've already seen data and numbers on the impact that the LGBTQ vote can have whenever we have races that are in the margins. So I just think that's just super important data that any journalist that is covering political work or elections needs to be taking into account. I think the other piece of data that I would assign to any media content creator or journalist is to look at the disproportionate impact of discrimination on LGBTQ people of color. Those of us who lived that experience didn't need to see the study released to know it to be true. And this is another tool to add to your toolbox to really draw more nuanced coverage of our lived experiences. And finally, this is my plug for the Task Force Action Fund's Queer the Vote program. We're really committed to mobilizing LGBTQ people in Florida and Texas to vote. So if you are a young person turning 18, if you're a young person that's not even close to 18 yet, please visit our website, please sign up. We need you in these fights, and we're so excited to be in conversation with you and shake things up this year.
Wonderful, thank you. Good call to action. All right, Eva, what do you think? What are some of your suggestions for calls to action?
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, definitely do some research. There are so many organizations, brands out there that can really give you the rundown on everything that you need to know, even things that you weren't totally aware of when it comes to trans lives. So, following accounts like Vice News, like them, like the Black Trans Femmes in the arts, the Okra Project, there are so many organizations started by Black trans women that really can help educate you. Something else I think people should do is think about, when it comes to your everyday interactions, when you see when you see a trans person and on the street, whether you're totally aware of them being trans or not, how are you reacting? Are you having a negative reaction or a positive one? When you meet a trans person, whether that's in the workplace, at a party, at some event, are you being friendly to them? Are you actually trying to make the world a better place for trans people? I mean, that really does start at the personal level. So, thinking about how you've interacted with trans folks in the past versus now, now is really the time to do that work. And third, talk with your friends and your family. It shouldn't just be people on panels like this or in interviews in the media in Hollywood who are doing this work. Everyone does have a part to play. And, nothing is going to happen if everyone stays silent.
Thank you very much. Very strong points. All right, Xochil, what are some action items that we can help you with as we wrap down? You said you need our help. How can we help you?
Well, knock on the door. We need producers. We definitely need people. We need to cultivate people who are passionate about journalism, and we need that for sure. I would say we need to connect. Social media is a great platform these days. We need to connect to the LGBT community better. There's so much out there and ways that we can have the LGBT community be part of the people we see on TV talking about the issues that impact them. If you're a journalist already in a newsroom, be creative with pitching your stories. Don't get defeated. Try and try again. Um, you know, it's been a challenge to get Latino stories done in the past. It still continues to be, actually. Um, but I think it does come down to the pitch, and it does come down to knowing truly that community and saying, hey, I have someone who wants to speak about this issue. This is how it impacts them. Really know what you're pitching when you're pitching. I think it really starts there. And if you're interested in becoming a journalist who is going to report about everything that's going on in your community or in the world, and we want to see it through your eyes. Come knock on our doors. We're hiring.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you all. I could have spent really an hour probably with each of you. So all of you have a lot to say, and I hope that our audiences have really learned from what you have to say. There's more to be said, but I think this is what I'm hoping is the continuation of a dialogue. Personally, also follow honor41.org. And if you're interested and in a fellowship with JSK, it's jsk.stanford.edu. Thank you again for your time. I look forward to seeing all of you. And Fernanda, thank you again for having us. Back to you.
Thank you. What a fascinating conversation. I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time, for participating, to our audience for being here, for being open to this wonderful conversation. Thank you, Alberto, also, and also to Fundamedios. They are our co-sponsor, and to the staff that participated and did all the work around this wonderful panel. Thank you very much. Follow us on our social media platforms, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Everybody, thank you so much. Adios.